Everyone, it's Petticoat from Rock Daydream Nation, and I've got the Parish of Rock back. How are you, my friend?
I'm very good, thanks, Peter. Pleased to be here as always. Yeah, really looking forward to this.
Fantastic. We're going to do a an appraisal of an album that probably doesn't get talked about. And for that matter, I think this may be the first time we've actually spoken about this band on the channel. We're talking about Saxon and the 1985 album Innocence is No Excuse. So this was probably fair to say Parish maligned in the day. It was Saxon's first album with EMI, possibly their big breakthrough into the US market, but needless to say, it didn't do so well. Bit of a controversial album, divides the fans. It's definitely got a different sound to those early Saxon albums, and the Saxon that they were kind of at the vanguard of the new wave of British heavy metal. A lot of chart success. So people seem to forget, but they were charting really high in the UK charts with Wheels of Steel, Strong Arm of the Law, etc., etc. So what we're going to do is talk about our first encounter with the album, spotlight some songs, and then give our appraisal with 2024 ears. So, Parish, what was your first encounter with this album, Innocence is No Excuse?
Well, I'm going to start with my first encounter with Saxon. So I was with Saxon from 1980. My first I was aware of them was when the single Wheels of Steel came out, got in the top 10 over here. From that, from that, I went and saw them live. I can't remember whether the first time I saw them live was supporting Motorhead or whether it was at a local town hall, but they were very close together. And they were fantastic live. They were really good. And then from there, got all the albums: Wheels of Steel, Strong Arm of the Law, Denim and Leather, Power and the Glory, and although I can't find it, it's Crusader as well. And I loved all of those albums, and I would say they were one of my favourite bands of the early '80s. I saw them play live a lot of times. And then this came out, and I hated it, absolutely hated it. Fell out of love with Saxon overnight, um, and it was everything I didn't want from Saxon, really. I mean, in some ways, it's odd that I disliked it because I liked other bands that were similar. I mean, I liked Twisted Sister, I liked Motley Crue, um, Rat, bands like that. So that kind of hair metal, glam metal sound was certainly something I liked. I just didn't want it from Saxon. um, so I didn't like the album at all. And even from the outset, I mean, the album cover kind of gives it away what it's likely to be. And even now, I can't really work out whether she's eating an apple or a bar of soap. It's not
Yeah.
quite. I think it's supposed to be an apple, but to me, it looks like she's eating a bar of soap.
And if you
And
look at
then,
closer examination, it looks like it's photoshopped because
yeah,
there's
yeah, it
sort of
does.
droplets of apple juice, but it's definitely not. It's been sort of doctored with.
It's strange. And then you look at. I mean, they've got one of the best, most iconic logos, I think, in rock music. And yet, on this album cover, it just looks so wrong. It looks out of place. And they're almost embarrassed because on every other album, the logo's right front and center of the album covers, as I showed earlier.
Mm,
Front and center, front and center. But on this
yeah,
one, they've stuck it up in the top left-hand corner as if they're almost embarrassed to put their logo on it.
yeah.
It's
And another thing I'm not really fussed about is the old William Tell. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, yeah, on the back. Well,
Um,
there's three odd pictures on the back, isn't there? There's the William Tell, and then towards the bottom, yeah, that's it. There's that lady in stilettos crushing the apple, beating, yeah. So
yeah,
it's
I think that's a
bizarre,
little bit. It's a little bit off.
yeah. But the worst photo is on the inner sleeve.
Oh, that's a shocker.
I mean, it's, I mean,
Yeah.
exactly.
It makes them look like Twisted Sister in a sense. It's sort of like really cheesy and really zany. And
Yeah,
the word we use in Australia is daggy. I don't know what the English word is, but kind of not cool.
crap is the
Yeah.
is what I'd use. I mean,
Mm,
what's bizarre though is what I liked. One of the things I liked about Saxon, and I think it was one of the things most people liked about Saxon, is they kind of look like your dad or your big brother up on stage playing heavy metal. They just look like ordinary guys, and that kind of inspired all of us to, to particularly those in bands like I was. It kind of you didn't have to look like a rock star to be in a band and do really well. So to see him come out like that and try, with the poodle hairstyle and the perms, and it was just disgraceful in my view. I just thought I mean, it wasn't that they'd just kind of, I don't know, gone corporate. It was like a real betrayal that somebody
yeah.
like that could end up having to do that to themselves to try to get record sales.
And absolutely, Parish, and they lost their chief songwriter after this album, and that's telling. Steve Dawson, who's the bass guitarist
Mm,
and was a major
yeah.
songwriter, so that speaks volumes. But look, my encounter with this album was the song "Back on the Streets," which was on a heavy metal compilation album. I don't mind that song, and I used to collect Kerrang magazine, and they were really pushing this album. I think I seem to recall there was a volume of Kerrang, and they had all the photos and did a big profile. And this was going to be Saxon's big push to the US. So that's my recollection of it. My recollection of Saxon per se is that those early albums, meat and potatoes, new wave of British heavy metal, and in my opinion, they always sat between Iron Maiden and Judas Priest, probably a little bit more to Judas Priest sonically, where Iron Maiden was more of galloping and metal and a lot of intricate sort of time signature changes and lyrically much different. Saxon were meat and potatoes, but they'd be closer to Judas Priest, where they'd have the power chords, but the interplay between the guitars. And I always loved the vocals of Biff. He's got that wonderful cut through vocals, and we'll talk more about that as we go through the album. I've always liked those early albums, but I never got this album until much, much later. So to be quite frank, I've only had the actual album per se. I bought it about 5 years ago. So I heard the bad news, I heard all the bad reviews, and I resisted it, even though I knew the song Back on the Streets and I didn't mind that song. So I've only lived with this album for a relatively short time comparative to you. But anyway, that's what it is. So why don't we spotlight some songs, and then we can give our viewers a little bit more of a semblance of what we think of the album and how this sits in 2024. What's the first song that you'd like to spotlight?
Um, well, well, firstly, I'd say I've not heard this in over 40, well, nearly 40 years. I must have played it 4 or 5 times at the time, didn't like it, went into the record collection, and I'd not listened to it since then until you suggested we did it as a as an episode. So, so it's been quite interesting listening to it now. And as you say, we'll come back to our sort of 2024 thoughts on it. But so I'm going to go through. I'm going to do a mixture of songs I dislike and songs that I don't mind. So the opener I really don't like. I think it's a really weak opener. So that's Rocking Again. I think it's a very weak opener. It's kind of very cliched. It sets out the stall of what the album's trying to do, which is break into the American rock market. I think it's got a very weak chorus, and it's just a bad album opener for me. Um, Call of the Wild, the second track, I quite like that in that I like the guitars. I think the guitars, in fact, a common theme of the album is I think the guitars are really good. They're loud, they're up front, and I think Graham Oliver and Paul Quinn actually didn't get the memo about this is supposed to be an American rock album, because the
Yeah.
guitar playing is still very Saxon in most places, not in every place, but in most places. So it's almost like they didn't get the memo. But so I like the guitars as it starts. The verses I think is quite good, but I just think it's let down by the chorus. It's almost as if they wrote the song and somebody goes, no, no, you're not listening. This is meant to be for the American market. So they went back and rewrote the chorus to suit the American market.
I'll do a counterpoint, if you don't mind, with
Yeah,
those first two.
of
That's probably
course.
a really
Yeah.
good start to the show. So, Rockin' Again is a strange one to start off the album. I think this album is sequenced kind of poorly. It could be sequenced a lot better. Like some of the really best tracks in the album are deep, deep, deep into the album, where they should be sort of a little bit more top heavy and bring the listener into the whole experience. Now, Rockin' Again is a power ballad, a pseudo power ballad. You've got the gang vocals, which were very prevalent in the early 80s because of the Mutt Lang sound and Def Leppard, AC/DC. It was all the rage. Look, I appreciate the sentiment of the song. It's like a call to arms with their fans all around the world. Watch the video clip. The video clip's probably better than the actual song, but it's a very odd choice to pick as the first song on the album. And another thing that sort of rattles in the back of my head is that this is very much like a Judas Priest Turbo album. Turbo came out later, but it's sort of that difficult, let's get a little bit more commercial. We want to get maybe in the pop charts and sell a few more units. And if you recall, Judas Priest, like they opened their shows, their live shows with Out in the Cold, the ballad.
I know the song anyway. I
Yeah,
know the one you
yeah.
mean.
But
Yeah,
anyway,
it's
I
not an
think it's
album I listen. It's not an album I listen to very often.
but anyway, I think it's really strange they start off with a power ballad, Parish. Now, Call of the Wild, I like it. It's got those chunky guitar chords, power chords, and that's what I love about Saxon. And you've got the nice interchange between the guitarists, and there's beautiful interplay between the guitarists all the way through this album. And I agree, they haven't read the memo. There's nice tempo changes. The gang vocals are kind of triple tracked. There's a lot of not only you get one track of Biff, you get triple. And there's something about his vocals. Biff's one of my favorite heavy metal vocalists or hard rock. He's kind of got that pseudo Bon Scott tonality, a little bit raspy, but massive cut through. And when you've got a gang vocal, which is Biff times the power of three, it adds a lot of oomph. So I really like that second track. I love Call of the Wild.
I suppose one of my criticisms of the album is I think most of the song titles are pretty cliched. So Rocking Again, Call of the Wild, Back on the Streets, Rock and Roll Gypsy. They all kind of sound like they've been done before as song titles. But Back on the Streets, but I really like it because I think it'd be a really good Night Ranger song. The one thing I don't like is Biff's folk. So Biff's singing is great. I think there's nothing wrong with his singing. I just don't think his voice suits a lot of these songs. His voice is too heavy metal, and these songs are trying to be more American. And so if Back on the Streets was sang by Jack Blades, I think it'd be one of my favourite Night Ranger songs. I think it's a really good song. I just don't think Biff's vocals suit it. So great song, but not the vocals. The next one, Devil Rides Out, I think is my favourite track on the album. Certainly one of my favourite tracks. I love the title, Devil Rides Out. It's got a Princes of the Night kind of vibe to it. The only thing that lets it down in my eyes is the lyrics. I mean, normally a Devil's Ride Out by Saxon would be sort of about some historical event with Witchfinder General or something, and yet this is just about a woman he's fallen out with and has sort of betrayed him. So the lyrical content's the only thing that really lets it down for me.
Yeah, I'll do a counterpoint to those two.
Okay, go on.
Yeah, that's all right. So, Back on the Streets, that's probably my favorite song on the album. and I like Biff's vocals, but within the song, it's got a dual personality. You've got the verse where he's doing that sort of vocal, which is like got that Bon Scott, and he's kind of riffing, and you've got this heavy riff below it, and then it goes into the chorus, and it goes all journey. So it sort of oscillates between he's doing this hard rock vocal in the verse, goes to the chorus, and then it goes all sort of light-hearted. We're back on the streets again, and yeah, it's got two personalities within the one song, but I do like it, and that was the hook that got me into this particular album. And I've got to do a shout out. Paul Quinn does this wonderful guitar solo on this song. It really soars. Devil Rides Out. It's got this wonderful chugger guitar line and this sturdy bass line all the way through it. But the lyrics, it's just black-hearted woman, toxic, stay away from the witchy woman. It's been done so many times in so many different bands. I mean, it's sort of, yeah, it's a bit of a cliche. And interesting, when you look at Wikipedia, it relates to a certain Martin Popoff that you may have heard of. He said that this is full steam to the bastions of metal without an idea in their dust-clouded heads, as shown on the cliched titles and in the old age ineptness of the rulebook head-banging fair. Ouch.
Yeah. Well, I certainly agree with the titles. I think, and the next song proves that, Rock and Roll Gypsy. I mean, how many songs are called Rock and Roll Gypsy? And I suppose I'd say it's okay. It just sounds very cliched. Heard it all before. Sort of a C plus maybe. If it was a school report, it'd get a C plus. Could do better. Would be my view on that song.
Try harder.
Try harder, exactly. And then the start of side 2, Broken Heroes. I absolutely love that song. It just, everything about the album for me comes together and really works well with that. So yeah, favourite song in the album. I love the lyrics. It's kind of got the typical Saxon lyrics, which are a bit different to everybody else. It's a bit slower. It's got a bit of a moody feel to it. Yeah, Broken Heroes. When I played it again recently, I couldn't believe how good a song that was actually on this album. So yeah, it's definitely my favourite song on the album.
All right, I'll do a counterpoint to those two. Rock and Roll Gypsy. I did a show on Stormbringer, and what was one of the songs on Stormbringer? Gypsy. It seems it's a very 70s thing. It was an obsession with a lot of hard rock bands that they would talk about gypsies. You don't hear about gypsies much anymore, but yeah, it's a bit of a rock and roll cliche, so I'll leave it. I think you summed it up perfectly. Broken Heroes, that is a good opening track. That's what you need, not like Rocking Again. To me, it's got that wall of sound. So it's definitely, it reminded me of Mutt Lange and his work on Def Leppard. It's got that sort of guitar sound. I wouldn't say it's muted, but it's very polished. And there's, it's got this nice sort of interplay where you've got these chords and this nice little 3-note riff that pulsates all the way through the song and drives it along. And I like how the lyrics are kept very simple, like "Where are they now?" I think that's the lyric, and it's repeated over and over again. But it's sort of it's quite effective. I think this is it's probably one of the best songs on the album. And maybe if this was the first single, it may have had a bit more cut through. What do you think, Parish?
I think so. I mean, I think if it had been the album opener, it would have made a big difference, because the one that they had, what's it called, Rocking Again, as I say, kind of set the scene for everything else. It almost put you in the mindset of what you were going to hear, particularly after the album cover as well. Whereas I think if the album had started with this song, certainly I would have been thinking, oh, this is going to sound like a Saxon album, and then maybe I wouldn't have been prejudiced from the start. And certainly if it'd been the first single, if it'd been like a lot of singles are released before the album came out, then I would certainly have been in the right headspace for the album. I would have been looking forward to it. So yeah, I just think it was a missed opportunity because I think it's such a good
Absolutely.
song. Yeah.
Absolutely. And how influential was Pyromania by Def Leppard in regards to a lot of the sonics of metal in the UK? I mean, another band that comes to mind that should have and could have been a big contender is Heavy Pettin from Scotland.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
their couple of albums are just sort of very Def Leppard sounding like. And I hear a lot of Def Leppard in this album. So
Yeah.
a
But
lot of
I
people are looking
agree.
back at a lot of people are looking back at Pyromania as this is the ticket, the golden ticket for a cut through in America, but not necessarily was the case.
No, I mean, one of the notes I wrote down listening to it is it at first it looks odd that a new wave of British heavy metal band would make that change like Saxon have here. But when you think about it, it's not so odd when you consider that's exactly what Def Leppard did. Um, Members of Girl, who we mentioned before we came on air, Phil Lewis and Phil Collen, they made the break over into the States. Okay, it wasn't new wave of British heavy metal as such, but somebody like Billy Idol was able to basically not change his sound, but break in the States. So it probably wasn't when you can see when they sat down and planned the album, it probably wasn't such a silly idea as it felt like. But I think the big difference is Def Leppard with Pyromania went to the States and Americanized, but did it in a way that showed the Americans how it could be done. So they kind of took what the Americans were doing and did it better on Pyromania. Whereas
Well,
on this album, Saxon have done it, but just sound like a poor version of Twisted Sister or a poor version of Motley Crue or a poor version of Def Leppard. So I think that's the difference. It's not the fact that they tried to break the American market. It's just whether they did it in an innovative way or whether they were just following the crowd, really. And I think this was following the crowd.
yeah, I think the big problem is this.
It certainly doesn't
No,
help.
no, no. It's image. They're not a
Yeah,
good.
yeah,
They're not a pretty band. They're a bit
no,
rough and tumble. Like Def Leppard were young. This is an established band. So Saxon originated in 75 out of Son of the Bitch, and this is 1985. So they've got a good decade of rocking under their belt. Um, I put it in the category of one of your favorite bands. They're kind of like a meat and potatoes Slade. They're kind of
yeah,
like a
yeah.
Slade of heavy metal.
Yeah,
And
absolutely, I agree.
and America's very image conscious, and were they ever going to translate that? I think there's enough sonics in this album that they could have got a
Well, I
breakthrough,
think I
but
think the other
image
different.
wise, it was just not quite there.
Well, if you think about it, it was the era of MTV, and they had a great face for radio, didn't they? They didn't have a good face for MTV. But I don't think it would have been such a problem if they'd actually played to their strengths. I mean, another band that did really well in the early '80s, and again, you wouldn't say that they were typical. They were typically sort of glamour boys. Would be Dire Straits. And yet, Dire Straits made that transition by having videos that played to the music rather than their looks.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
and I suppose another one would be Genesis. Again, you'd look at Genesis in the early '80s, the three of them, and you wouldn't have obviously thought that they would have, broken MTV, but they did because of the way they did the videos. So
yeah,
I think if they played it differently and didn't try to look like a glam band, or a hair metal band as they became in the later '70s. They probably have done a lot better. But because they made that transition, it just was never going to work, was it? So
yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, they had the success in the UK at the start of the 80s, and it did incrementally, diminish during the
yeah,
decade. And they had to do something to, kind of translate that across, similar to Judas Priest, because Judas Priest had a bit of success in the UK, but as their success was sort of diminishing in the UK, they made the successful transition to the US. Like Point of Entry didn't do much in the UK, and that's when they were really just concentrating their energies on the US market and screaming for vengeance, etc. The proof is in the pudding. They were able to become a major draw card.
But with hindsight, they should probably have done what Maiden did, I think. Maiden never really made an attempt to break the States, did they? They focused on Europe and other parts of the world, which were more akin to their market. So I think they've got a cult following in the States, but I don't think Maiden ever made it the same way as, say, Def Leppard did. And I think Saxon had a big cult following in Europe, and maybe if they'd focused on that and built upon that, and similarly to Maiden, I think maybe they would have done better.
I think Maiden had a world domination sort of theory. They didn't sort of put all their eggs in one basket.
Yeah,
Um, I think their albums did go platinum and they were a draw card. Like Live After Death, Long Beach in California, that's a big. They were selling out of some pretty big
yeah,
venues in the mid 80s and Power Slave, but they weren't as big as Judas Priest. But I think they had a vision that we just don't want to conquer America. We want to spread the love all around the world and do a world domination. And I
yeah,
just remember seeing these T-shirts of Iron Maiden, World Slavery Tour, and you look at up and down of all the venues they played around the world. They played everywhere except Istanbul and India. I don't know. They played everywhere. But Judas Priest would just it seemed between just after British Steel, point of entry, they went across to the US and they really concentrated on the US to the detriment. I think you were telling me in a conversation offline that they didn't really play UK for quite some time and probably lost a chunk of their audience.
yeah. I think so. I mean, Judas Priest went over. I think this was probably the British Steel album, and they went over and supported Kiss. And I think that was when they realised that what they had to do to break America, which was really focus and tour there a lot and really almost move over there, certainly metaphorically, if not physically. They had to move over there and put all the focus into it. And I'm sure that was kind of Gene Simmons type of voice that they were playing off. And built a stage show, which again, whilst maybe not quite as over the top as Kisses, was certainly going along that way to to create that image. And so yeah, they certainly during the 80s they really dominated their focus on America, I think,
Yeah,
to the detriment of the UK.
absolutely. But look, Saxon, I love them, but maybe I'll ask you, do you think like there are some bands that have got that X factor? Do you think Saxon may have been missing that X factor that would have got them over the line into America? Because all the elements are there on paper. Great songs, great musicians, a singer that's got that nice tonality, that heavy metal cut through. Do you think there was just maybe some star power that was missing? It's sort of like an X factor that,
Yeah,
to
yeah, I
be
think so. I mean,
realistic.
I think I think their appeal was always to a core audience, heavy rock audience, and I think they were lacking something that meant that they never translated to the wider public, including in the UK. So, and it's interesting to not always easy to put your finger on it because you'd say, well, what's the difference between Motorhead and Saxon in many ways? And yet Motorhead had something about them that they became stars in their own right, and almost anybody in the UK would know who Lemmy is and would, a bit like the T-shirt I'm wearing. I bought that in
Yeah.
the local supermarket. You certainly wouldn't see a Saxon T-shirt in the local supermarket. So, but it's hard to know why Motorhead did and Saxon didn't really, because there's not a lot of difference between them. But yeah, it's just missing that star quality, I guess. The quality that Lemmy brought that maybe Biff doesn't.
Lemmy's got X Factor. Maybe Biff
Yeah,
didn't have that,
yeah,
doesn't have that. And also, Motorhead was cross generational and cross genres. So you had a lot of people, from our age to our sons and daughters who knew who Lemmy were, and also, the genres Punks knew them, punks followed them.
Yeah,
The headbangers loved them. The hard rock crowd loved them. It's pretty unusual, like on a fledging label like Bronze Records, which was went into bankruptcy. The only album that went to number one and almost made them this whole label solvent was No Sleep to Hammersmith. So they had something going for them, and I think
yeah,
Lemmy, for all his ugliness, had that rock star charisma. But if I
exactly.
just think I don't know, they're probably a band of the people. They're working class, meat and potatoes, and I don't know. I wouldn't say anonymous, but just missing that X factor.
Yeah, yeah, I'd agree. Yeah.
But folks, don't throw stones at us. We love Saxon, but
Yeah,
we're
absolutely.
just wondering why they didn't get that superstar status. That's where we're coming from. So, all right, well, let's look at some more songs. Gonna
Okay, so the
shout.
next one, Gonna Shout, and my answer to that would be no, please don't. I just don't like that song at all. It's probably the worst song in the album for me. It's trying
Oh,
too hard to be a hair
shouty.
metal anthem. Yeah,
It's
just
amped
don't
up,
like
isn't
it.
it? It's fully amped up and it's a bit over the top.
Yeah.
So it's like they're listening to Twisted, as you said, they're listening to Twisted Sister and they're trying to ramp it up to the power of 10. Yeah, I find that a bit of a headache song.
Everybody Up. I like it. I think I like it mostly because of the guitars. I think it's got a really good guitar sound on it. The verse I don't have a problem with, but again, I think the chorus lets it down. It's almost as if they've written the chorus last to try to get it to fit in with the record company's brief. But I don't dislike the song. But as I say, the chorus I think lets it down.
Yep. Raise Some Hell.
Raisins Hill, I think I've written down here sounds like bad Alice Cooper. So it's okay, but it's not
Yeah,
particularly good.
yeah. It's a bit of a filler track.
Yeah.
Bit of a filler track.
The last song, Everything, what's it called? Give Everything You've Got. I really like that.
I think it's a
Um,
corker. They've saved. That's
yeah,
what I was alluding to at the start of the show. That I think they've saved one of the best songs to number 10. It's right in.
yeah,
You've got Nigel Glocker. I think well, you're a drummer. It sounds like a double kick. He's really
it
going
is.
for it all the way
Yeah,
through.
it's really good. It's really fast. I think it's really good. The only thing I don't like on it is about halfway through, Biff tries sort of finishes a line with baby. And it just doesn't sound right. Him sort of trying to sing that kind of line. But apart,
Yeah,
that's my only niggle about the song. I think other than that, again, if they kicked the album off with it, I think it'd have been a great opening track and would have again given a completely different feel to what the album was going to sound like, I think.
absolutely. And it it goes so fast. This song, it's in danger that the guitars are slightly out of rhythm. It feels like the downstrokes of the guitar chords are kind of on a syncopated rhythm. It's sort of dun dun, and it's sort of and you're listening to it and you're thinking, oh, this drumming's getting away from the guitar lines. And you sort of you have to listen all the way to the end, and it all works out. It all resolves itself. But it's sort of like a bus that's speeding down a hill and it's going faster and faster and faster, and you're wondering, oh, what's going to happen? But I like it. I think it's one of the best songs
Yeah,
in the album. But alas, they put it right at the end. So it's sort of like the record company label was not comfortable of putting a rocker. They wanted to put all the more commercial, um, sort of MTV friendly songs right at the start of the album, and the real Saxon, the real personality, the real DNA of Saxon, right at the end in the last track.
I agree.
And Parish, they're signed to the Beatles label, Parlophone. That's not shabby. You think that's kind of one of the more blue chip record labels that you could ever ask for, and it just didn't sell. Can you recall in the day? Did you see it in record stores? Was it getting any
Yeah,
promotion?
I got it. I got it pretty much as soon as it came out. As I said, I was a big Saxon fan. It had, from memory, it had a reasonable review in Kerrang. It either had 3.5 or 4 stars. So,
Four Ks,
it
4Ks, three and
four
a half.
Ks, yeah, 4 Ks, yeah. So it had a reasonable review in Kerrang. I got, as I say, got it pretty much when it came out. I was just so disappointed when I put it on the turntable.
Absolutely.
I have to say I was disappointed with the album sleeve. I did wonder,
Oh,
um,
oh. Yeah,
but
well, that's what you felt like doing to the record label. See the girl's
it,
stiletto on the
it
apple. You
was,
felt
yeah,
like doing with
that's
your heel on the album.
exactly
To number
right.
36 in the UK charts. So they were really losing a chunk of their audience, weren't they? And
Yeah, I
Billboard,
mean, normally they would be around the top 10, number 10, maybe certainly top 20, and normally around the top 10 with their albums. And
yeah,
um, but then I suppose the new wave of British heavy metal by 85 was dropping away generally. So apart from a few bands, most of the bands that had success in the early 80s were disappearing. So again, you can understand why they were trying to do something different. And I
mm,
guess EMI signed them with the view that, as you said earlier, if Def Leppard can do this, why can't Saxon? So I suspect it was part of the master plan for EMI when they signed them up, but it just didn't fit Saxon really.
yeah. So the next album after this was Rock the Nations, and that was still charting around 36, 37. And in the US, it was a number 144. This incidentally charted a number 133. So they weren't really making much of an impact in America. Then you had Destiny in 1988. And where did that chart? That charted at 49. So in the 80s,
Well,
they're kind of
I
going down a
stopped
cliff.
I stopped buying after this album, and it's only been
Mm,
in the last 5 years that I've started. I've seen Saxon quite a few times at festivals and a
yes,
support act, but
yes,
always they always seemed like a heritage band, really, just playing the hits.
yes.
But then on not the latest, I've got the latest album here, and I would say this is definitely my top 5 albums of this year so far. I think it's really good. The last one, Carp DM, I thought was really good. So
Mm,
I think the recent albums are kind of back. They sound different to the early albums, but they're writing some really good songs and they've got a really good sound to them.
yeah. And Biff still
And
sounds
then
good,
now
doesn't he?
Biff is, yeah, I saw Biff live about a month ago now, and he was fantastic. Came across really well. So
Yeah.
his voice is as good as ever. So they're having a bit of
Revival.
a bit of a revival, exactly, and
Yeah.
which is good to see. It's not, I think Europe kept them going through the dark years for them. They always seem to do well in Scandinavia and Germany, and I think that was why the band generally kept going rather than break up. And so
Mm,
it's good to see them back, and it's good to see them doing well, really.
yeah. But the loss of Steve Dawson, um, that was a big blow to them after, putting this album. And then you had this strange scenario where you had two splinter bands, didn't you? It was like Steve Dawson Saxon, or
Yeah,
you had the Biff Saxon and diminishing, less and less original members in that band. And then you had another sort of parallel Saxon band, and that's always kind of ordinary, where you're basically dividing your audience, especially if your audience is diminishing, isn't it?
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Did you see
Yeah.
the other alternative Saxon?
No, I didn't. To be honest, in the late 80s and probably through most of the 90s, I didn't see Saxon at all. But
Mm,
then, as I say, sort of in the 2000s, they started getting on the festival circuit and started supporting other bands. So
mm,
around, I don't know, 2000, 2002, something like that was when I started seeing them again and started enjoying them for what they were. Um, but as I say, most recently, the new albums have pushed them back from just being a heritage band to, certainly in my eyes, having real validity as as a band in their own right, releasing good music. So
Yeah, absolutely. And they're touring the States with Uriah Heep, and by all reports, that's um, doing really, really well. And,
yeah.
sort of putting their music out to a potential new audience. So, all right. Well, 2024 is, Parish. What's your appraisal of this album?
Well,
Is it as
the
bad
positive.
as you remember it?
Well, the positives are I think the guitars are really good. It's really loud up front. Um, I like the production. I think the production stands up well. There's no obvious sort of 80s sound to the production, so you haven't got any syn drums. If there is any synthesizer, it must be very low in the mix because I can't really hear any. It's certainly not up front if there is any. And the other thing I'll give him credit for is on this album, there's no outside writers. Now, a lot of bands at this stage, we're getting a lot of songwriters in to help them make the change. Maybe with hindsight, that was a mistake. Maybe they should have had a couple of outside writers. I don't know. But credit to them that all the songs were written by them. I suppose another way of putting it is they've nobody else to blame. but nonetheless, I think that was good. Negatives, I think generally the songs aren't there. I think the lyrics are poor. Even the songs I like, I think generally the lyrics are poor. Um, I mentioned earlier, I think the song titles are very generic. And I think Biff vocals, although very strong, in a lot of cases don't suit the material. So they're the kind of the positive, the negatives. Overall, I'd give it a 6.5 out of 10. Back then, I would have probably given it a 1, and I would have felt I was being generous. But now I'd give it a 6.5 out of 10, and I'd definitely play it again. It's not one I'm going to put back in the record collection and not listen to for another 40 years. I'd definitely listen to it, again. And there's enough on it actually that. And I think the other thing that's odd actually is with what happened with rock music in the second half of the 80s. If this had actually come out in 88 or 89, I think it would have stood out a lot better. But I think because it was at the start of that hair metal, it kind of got lost in it. But actually, there's a lot of Saxon's characteristics still in there. And I think if it had come out later, it might have been more appreciated. Because it wouldn't have been quite so. Um, it wouldn't have sounded quite the same as everything else that was coming out in the later 80s. So I think maybe timing didn't help them with the album either. So, but yeah, overall, yeah, quite like it. 6.5 out of 10.
You almost said 7.
I nearly said 7. Yeah,
Yes, slip of the tongue. Slip of the tongue.
yeah, somewhere between 6.5. Well, somewhere between 6 and 7, which is why I went
Yeah,
six and
well,
a
I've
half in
seen
the
you
end.
on your Contrarian shows. You get very incremental. I've seen some people 6.75 or
Yeah,
6.666 or something.
yeah.
I agree with a lot what you say. I disagree on Biff. I think the vocals suit all the material. I could listen to him singing just traditional rock and heavy metal, and I just love that Bon Scott, that really raspy tone because it just has cut through. Musically, this album really appeals to me. It's kind of like a sax. It's like a merging between the new wave of British heavy metal and a melodic rock album with a little bit of AOR. Probably actually a little bit more than a little bit, a lot of AOR. Lyrics are terrible, but it's how you sell a cliche. And some of the time it's convincing. Like Back on the Streets is a cliched song, but I like it. It's sort of they sell it, but sometimes the cliches are just so trite, you just got to cringe a little bit. Like there's a couple of songs here where yeah, they can't really sell the cliche any further than it needs to. Yeah, look, I think the musicianship's nice on this song on this album, but it's not the Saxon that I would go to in the record collection. To me, I'm always Wheels of Steel, Strong Arm of the Law, all of those early Saxon albums are the ones that I would go to. I mean, what's your signature Saxon album, Parish?
I'd probably go to Power and the Glory.
Right. Okay. Wheels of
Yeah,
Steel for me. Wheels of Steel. That's probably
yeah.
the one that I'd go
Look,
to.
I think they're all really good. But what I quite like about both Power of the Glory and Denim and Leather is I think the lyrics and the tone of the albums are really good. So I
Mm,
think they move on slightly from that kind of biker rock that the first, well, second and third really, Wheels of Steel and Strong in the Arm of the Law have. And I think they start writing some really clever songs with the next two with the lyrics.
yep.
Which is why this is another reason why the sound is such a letdown at the time. Having been used to songs like Princess of the Night, and even the band plays on is not your typical sort of celebration of heavy metal, really. The Eagle have landed. Those sort of songs are, I think, very cleverly written, and then you come to the lyrics on this album, and then you just wonder what's happened, really.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'd give it a six, but I would play it from time to time, simply because there's some cracker of songs. You
Oh, well,
know,
there you go. So I was higher than you then.
yeah,
That's a
a little
surprise.
bit, but
Yeah,
yeah. All right, well there you go, folks. We've kind of semi-defended this album, but probably the um, hate that it got in 1985 was maybe a little bit over the top. And to be frank, Parish, anytime a band changed their fashion sense or changed their um, musicology, it always seemed to create a bit of a stir in the 80s, didn't it? And,
it did.
looking back, some of it, was a little bit absurd, but I don't think this was a major change for them because I think if you look at the last couple of albums, there are enough hints to show that they were going for a more of an American commercial direction. But yeah, it probably doesn't deserve the hate it got in 1985, but it's not a great album. It's not, you know, top tier Saxon and, like those early couple. As
Yeah,
always,
I agree.
Parish, appreciate you being on the show. We will dig out something out of the vaults and give a reappraisal in 2024. You can see the Parish of Rock on the Contrarians. Plenty of things. Parish is also on Twitter. I've seen you've got a
Yeah,
bit of a Twitter account. Lots of good things happening. Please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. Tell us what your favorite Saxon album is. Tell us if you think Innocence is No Excuse sucks, or whether you think it's a you know underrated masterpiece. But one thing's for sure, you'll see me in the parish doing more shows in 2024. We'll check you later. Cheers.